All right, that's going to be the shortest intro music we've ever had for the show today, folks. It's 4 o'clock, or a little bit after. We had some technical difficulties today. My name is Eric Stoller. I'm the host of Student Affairs Live. We are live on the air, folks. Finally made it. We had some technical issues. Jeff Lail, apparently, he's got some sort of Commodore 64 that he's working with today for his computer, so thank you for bearing with us. We got the technical issues taken care of. This is Student Affairs Live, your weekly web show about student affairs topics that student affairs professionals want to know and learn more about. As always, folks, the hashtag for the show is #SALive. That's right. Tweet at us. Tweet your questions, your comments, resources, etc., and we will answer them on the air. That's right, live, just for you. Folks, Student Affairs Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. That's right, we're part of a larger network. HigherEdLive.com. Follow us on Twitter at HigherEdLive. Our awesome intern Ardith is going to be tweeting away during the show. It's going to be great. And yeah, she's going to be answering your questions as well and tweeting out some of your best bits. Folks, we are brought to you live today, ad-free, courtesy of our awesome sponsors, Integral. Integral, thank you so much for this. They are also the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Please make sure you check out Integral's webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. And that happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to send out a tweet with that link right now. So folks, got a great show today. I'm really excited about it. We're going to have Jeff Lail on the show, as I mentioned earlier. I believe he is on a Commodore 64. That's right, one of the new ones. Hopefully it's going to be ready to go. I don't think we have video, but we do have him live via satellite with audio. Folks, but before we get to that, I'm going to go and do my little feature that I like to call Challenge and Support. It's the news, higher education news, what's going on, what's happening around the world. So here we go. Let's dive on in. First piece of news that caught my eye today was a news story from Des Moines Area Community College from my home state of Iowa about a tweet that a student had posted, and the post actually says from this student, who wants to shoot up the DMACC Ankeny campus the same time I shoot up the urban campus, which I'm not sure if they meant urban or urbana. But anyway, this individual was actually arrested the second day that he showed up for college, because this tweet wasn't funny at all. I mean, you don't get to say this type of thing on the internet. And sort of in a sort of twist, I suppose you could say, a lot of colleges, a lot of universities are listening a lot to social media, as they should be. And so they caught that tweet when he put it out there. And so he's actually been charged for that. You don't just get to say these types of things on Twitter, because it can have serious and significant ramifications. So for folks that are in student conduct, interesting story for you to read for sure, coming out of DMACC. Another article that honestly I thought was really moving, really touching, and really an important part of the dialogue for those of us that work in student affairs. It's by Leanne Membus, and the title of the article is Life After Yale, Undocumented. And it chronicles her life as a Latina who graduated from college, graduated from Yale, and she's also undocumented, and sort of some of the things that she's gone through, some of the things that she has to look forward to, and just kind of what's happening for her right now. And it really underscores the need for the DREAM Act in this country for a lot of students who went to high school, wanted to go to college, or like Leanne went to college and got a degree, and now what? And so it's a really powerful story. Take a look at that article. Whatever you do, though, don't read the comments, because they're just disgusting, and we really need to have some serious discussions around the DREAM Act and higher education, and a ton of students that are currently undocumented that don't have access to higher education, because it is a major story in this country. I actually got this story from Jeff Lail, I think earlier in the week. I think he tweeted it out. Campus housing to go dry at Penn State Barron, which an interesting story, because apparently students that lived on campus who were 21 or older could actually have alcohol in the residence halls, which I could imagine would lead to tremendous challenges for those folks that worked in res life, because you'd have underage students interacting with students who were of age, who had purchased alcohol. How do you police it? How do you make sure that underage folks aren't going into rooms where of age folks are drinking? And it creates a challenge, I would imagine, that would be rather intense. And so what they've done is they just said, hey, we're going to go dry completely for campus housing, which could be kind of a challenge for some folks, especially if they've lived on campus, they're of age, and they kind of got used to being able to crack a beer every now and again. So interesting story. Should be interesting to see how students react at that campus. And for folks who work in res life, work in student conduct. Again, another interesting story for you to look at. The title of this one just really got me going earlier in the week. Social media fuels college mega party in Colorado. And I would sort of add a subtitle to that. The media fueled by hyping social media stories. It's just kind of ridiculous sometimes how the media likes to hype things regarding social media, usually in a negative light. But in this context, it was really interesting because there was an apartment complex near Colorado State University that had used Facebook, and I took a look at their Facebook page. They advertised this party as the biggest pool party of the year. And they got around 2,000 people showed up, and they had to call the cops. It got out of hand, and this is a company that bills itself as sort of being, hey, we're an outside company that provides campus housing for students. We're not run by the university. They don't have, I would assume they don't have the same kind of res life structures with RAs and RDs, that type of thing. So interesting conversation, I would imagine, at Colorado State around what do you do when an outside housing operation does something like this that obviously impacts a ton of your students, and there's a lot of teachable moments that can occur, a lot of conduct issues that are going to rise out of this. Interesting conversations for sure that are going to take place with the folks in Colorado. Seems like res life is just everywhere these days, at least on my radar. And this story comes from an op-ed in the New York Times entitled "When Roommates Were Random." Really cool graphic. Obviously, you got the party guy, and then you got the guy who is perhaps studying or he's sweating for some reason because he apparently doesn't like the loud music. I'm not sure what. But the sort of the gist of it is, we've got all these roommate matching services out there. Some things are using Facebook. Other schools have their own sort of proprietary roommate matching that they use. And this guy is kind of saying, hey, well, what about the sort of, quote, good old days when roommates just got together, they weren't matched up by preferences, just thrown together, and kind of talking about the dissonance that occurs in a good way when people from different backgrounds, different likes, dislikes, that kind of thing come together. That's how I met my roommates in college. We just got together, we didn't know each other, and developed lifelong friendships because of it. And who knows, we had the same relationship had we been matched up via Facebook or something else? Most likely. I think that it's one of those things where it doesn't have to be fully random and it doesn't have to necessarily be fully matched up, so maybe we could find something in the middle, kind of a happy medium. Last but not least, saw a really cool tweet from the folks at Duke, and I'm sure a lot of other schools are doing this, but the tweet read, "Cool new Foursquare list for Duke's first big weekend. Follow and find out where everything is happening." Really cool implementation of how to use Foursquare during sort of first couple of days of school when students are arriving. There's lots of activities, and I just thought it was a really cool way for them to get the word out about what was going on campus at the time during sort of the first couple days. So folks, every week I like to do what I like to call my unsolicited shout out of the week. Sometimes it's a person, it's a place, it's a service, etc. I came across these YouTube videos that were just amazing. They've had me humming along for the last couple of days from the songs on this video. And so my shout out of the week goes to the singer of these songs, and her name is Grace Oberhofer. That's right, Grace Oberhofer. She made these really cute videos about how she wasn't accepted to Harvard initially. She was on the wait list, and then how she got denied at Harvard, but she got accepted to Tufts. And she sings "Tufts, You Are the One," and it's like a Broadway song. If you like Broadway at all, I gotta say it's pretty cool. So folks, the shout out of the week again goes to Grace Oberhofer. If I'm at Tufts, let me tell you, here's a really cool student who's coming to your campus who's super talented. So pretty stoked that she's going to be coming to Tufts, because I think that she's got a lot of talent for sure. And Ardith's going to be tweeting out those links to those YouTube videos. All right, well, let me get the audio up here for Jeff. He doesn't look like he's got his video on yet, but don't worry, I've got some awesome pictures for him here. So Jeff, welcome again to the show, my friend.
How's it going, buddy?
It's going well. Let me make sure that I've got the appropriate picture here of you. Oh, hold on here. It looks like, there we go. There we go. I had to do some last-minute retooling of the graphics for you.
Well, that's all I can hope for, man.
Are you connecting via your Chrome laptop today?
No, man. We're, Chrome and Skype don't get along so well, but I'm actually on my desktop at work, and we've been having some wireless connectivity issues around campus, and so apparently I'm experiencing those right now.
That's okay. Everyone else is getting the awesome shot of you. I think you're riding a bull or something, or riding a horse, perhaps.
That was actually at the Field Museum in Chicago.
Oh, nice. Nice. Yeah. One of my favorite museums. Well, speaking of Chicago, Chicago is a great sports town, right? Lots of stuff going on professionally. But let's talk about EDU sports, because I think we've got plenty of material to talk about. what the heck is going on with college sports these days?
I mean, I assume what you're talking about, the main thing that seems to be in the news these days is scandal, from the fairly pervasive situation at Miami on from the president down to current players like their current star quarterback, Corey Harris, to the Willie Lyles situation that was going on with Oregon, to Cam Newton and people claiming that he's received $200,000 to play at Auburn. So it's a pretty pervasive thing going on right now. It seems like a lot of the big programs, specifically college football, and how did I leave out our boy Jim Tressel at Ohio State, and Terrell Pryor and some of the other players? It seems like it's a pretty common story these days to be hearing about more scandal associated with teams breaking the rules that the NCAA has set up to try to protect competitive advantage in college sports, protect against it.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like you've got these multi-million-dollar operations that it's very competitive. I mean, you've got folks who are recruiting students kind of under the table when they're juniors, sophomores in high school.
Well, man, the real thing is I think it's really easy to look at these folks and point fingers, be like, oh, Jim Tressel, bad guy, or to look at Cam Newton's father and say, oh, he's a bad guy. But I think any of us in that situation would be inclined to do that. We have to remember with the coaches in particular, you don't keep your job for graduating players, especially at a big program like Ohio State that has a tremendous tie to being a strong athletic program.
I think that's a pretty significant quote, that you don't keep your job for graduating players.
Yeah, and so if your job is tied to winning, people will do what it takes to win. I mean, these guys are making unbelievable fortunes doing this for a living, and I was trying to remember the numbers, but I would say I would say every state, probably the most highly paid state employee is the coach of the football and basketball team.
Yeah, depending on for the state institution.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I know Jim Calhoun, for example. I think he's in the $3 to $4 million range, I believe, and
I think it's Iowa State's football coach, similar kind of thing. You've got basketball coaches that are paid $2-3 million.
Oh yeah. So tons of incentive there to bend the rules and flex the rules, and then obviously the NCAA rules, if you look at them, are I think they said the rule book is 436 pages currently, down to minutia of when you can contact recruits, days of the week, whether they're at a tournament or not, that kind of thing, on down to whether you can serve them bagels during the course of the playing year. So I don't want to in any way make it sound like I think these are bad people, because I don't think they are.
Well, I think it's if we talk about people in terms of just good and bad, then we forget there's all that middle ground. I mean, ethics are slippery. Ethics are fluid in some cases. And,
absolutely.
And I think that, for me anyway, I think what it's going to take, if they're really serious about this mess that's happening. I mean, when you've got that guy down in Miami who was involved, it was like a $900 million Ponzi scheme, wasn't it?
Absolutely. $930 million, and he's now in prison.
Yeah, when you've got a guy who's committing felonies which are hurting other people, and it's tied to your college's athletic program, you got to make serious changes. Not just suspend someone from a single game, because honestly, that's like a slap on the wrist by a piece of balsa wood.
Well, Charles Robinson, that does the reporting for Yahoo, that has exposed several of these scandals and was instrumental in the Miami investigation, he's kind of known as the scandal buster. He's an investigative reporter, and some of the stuff I've read about him, he's more invested in the fact that he thinks this system is wrong. He thinks the system is broken, and he's set out to expose how it's broken. And, not in any way talking about him either, but I think what he's been able to uncover is really illustrative of sort of the back door and how things go on in college sports. The Miami situation in particular, I made the point on our podcast that every school has a booster, especially these big programs. And Nevin Shapiro was not exactly giving a mountain of money. He was definitely a contributor, but you look at a guy like Phil Knight, or at the owner of Nike, or I guess president of Nike, I don't know his exact title, but I would say the main name associated with Nike besides the athletes that endorse the product. And then you have T. Boone Pickens at Oklahoma State. I mean, lots of schools have these big name boosters that are given money. The difference it really is a matter of who the money's going to. Nevin Shapiro, you can make moral judgments on what he was doing for these players, the strip clubs, the, buying jewelry and that kind of stuff. But what he was doing was giving the players stuff they wanted. And the T. Boone Pickens and Phil Knights of the world are giving money to things they didn't think the players want, but it's going through the school and it's being used to build facilities.
Right. It's officially sanctioned.
Correct.
I mean, it's Phil Knight. I mean, the Oregon Ducks, they change their socks like 5 times a day because Nike gives them, different colored socks every day.
I think they have like 30 uniforms that they can use.
They go through so many, and I think that, that's the key is that what he does with his donations and support for the Oregon program is seen as above board because it's directly funneled to the university, whereas the guy down in Miami and some of these other folks, they're funneling it directly to the players, and there was no involvement or oversight from the university. I mean, I think that it gets really dangerous when we start talking about sort of what players want. I mean, you've got 18, 19-year-old, 20-year-old folks who
absolutely,
who, if you're coming from a background where you don't have access to all these amazing things, all these like just tons of cash, parties, yachts, boats, whatever, and that's just scratching the surface, and you have it presented to you as sort of this sort of celebrity-like fashion, it's going to be hard to say no.
Miami is sort of an insular institution in a lot of ways too, so it's what you mentioned there is absolutely more magnified at Miami. It's actually a very small school, but a lot of their recruiting base is people who are actually from the general Miami area. And we think of Miami, we think of South Beach, but that's, I don't want to get on here and start talking about Rick Ross too long, but like one of the things Rick Ross talks about is that's not my Miami, that's not the real Miami. And a lot of these folks in the outside of South Beach in Miami have come from incredibly poor backgrounds. Edgerrin James, Michael Irvin, these guys all grew up in that area, and the Miami program has become very much a representation of that area. And I think Nevin Shapiro, in a lot of ways, is sort of that booster gone rogue that everybody's afraid of in these programs. But again, I want to point out it's not that he's a bad guy. I think we can agree on that. You're running a Ponzi scheme. You're taking all these athletes to strip clubs and paying for abortions and all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, he's a bad guy, but I think a lot of the reason folks want to see change is tied in with this sort of scandal, as well as the other scandals at other schools. I think people believe that starting to pay the players and cover the what I would call the funding gap that exists in college sports with scholarships, they believe that that's going to mitigate the number of scandals that we see going on, and the number of guys who are attracted to someone like Nevin Shapiro as a way to, like you said, live that high glamour professional lifestyle.
Well, especially when they have a bounty. I mean, it was getting really disgusting. They had a bounty on other players, other teams. If you try to take out this guy on this team, you get X amount of dollars.
I don't remember that one specifically.
That was in the Yahoo article, that gigantic sort of expose.
Yeah, that was that Charles Robinson article. If you read it in there, I'm sure it was mentioned. I guess I got caught up on the yacht story and the abortion story.
Well, it was full of pretty much every single type of scandal you could think of.
Right.
And the idea of paying the players is really interesting, and I also want to touch upon the idea that they want to keep the students so that the students don't kind of get sucked into this world. And I think that paying the players at sort of, how do we define the rate? I mean, because let's say you're fully funded on campus, you've got a place to live, you've got obviously a full meal package, and maybe a living stipend.
Well, they actually don't receive living stipends for the most part.
Oh no, I'm saying that if that's what you did do, and you sort of included a living stipend, sort of like a graduate student, for example, gets X amount of dollars per month for in exchange for their assistantship, and you could argue that a collegiate athlete could possibly get a stipend in exchange for their service on the field, because the institution is raking in a ton of cash.
Well, what you're doing is making that obvious comparison to a graduate student. You're providing the service, so we'll pay you a stipend, which I don't think is necessarily a bad comparison. I think more on my end, what I see is the way the NCAA sets up their system. Their players are not allowed to earn money outside of their scholarship. The scholarship falls about $3,000 short of the cost of attendance. And that includes like travels home and that kind of thing. So if you, and again, this is sort of an average over schools. But I think the problem with the system right now is not that. Every player on the football team does not necessarily need a stipend in order to reduce the number of scandals, I don't think. I mean, would you probably be in agreement with that?
Well, I think if you wanted to sort of standardize it, it would be convenient to say everybody who's got a position on the roster, whether or not you get a ton of playing time or not, whether you're sort of the marquee player, who's going to win awards, everybody gets a stipend. And because I honestly think that the only reason that collegiate athletes get into sort of this celebrity status is because of businesses like ESPN, sports journalism.
It's a huge industry.
Exactly. People who need it around in order to pay their bills, creates lots of advertising, lots of sales. It's a major component of American capitalism.
Let's be serious here. It also drives applications to the school. I mean, I think the Butler is a really illustrative example. I believe their applications were up like 50-something% after their first national title run.
Yep.
In basketball, and that's not even talking about football. I would really like to see some numbers on Boise State, because I think they, as much as anybody, are a good representation of what's going on here, like how much actual effect happens. And by the way,
absolutely.
I might have video here in just a second.
Oh, nice. Well, let me know once you get it on. I'll switch the. I think Curtis was talking about the fact that your picture looks like you're from the Sistine Chapel. Maybe you're painted on it.
Well, that's not true.
It's rather saintly.
I wanted to dispel any rumors. I'm not actually in the Sistine Chapel.
Okay. So, now that you've got me completely off track here, and I'm reading the tweets, I'm gonna try to get this train back on the tracks. So, what the one thing though I think is that's really problematic is it's a big self-sustaining system, and when you've got students who are sort of turned into celebrities, and then they don't have a cocoon of folks around them who have their best interest in mind, things are going to happen, right? Like I look at it this way. Think about the folks who were the actors, the main actors on the Harry Potter series, right? They were little kids when they grew up, and they're on the show, and they're making just millions and millions of dollars, but you don't hear about them kind of going off the rails and doing all these things, because they're very private about their activities, but at the same time, the folks who sort of create these movies know if our cast gets out of line, it's bad press for the movies. It's not going to maybe gross as much. But when it comes to bad press for universities, if they don't get if it's just a slap on the wrist, they just keep going. It keeps on trucking along. I mean, unless you do an SMU to a school, right?
Yeah.
Like Ohio State, I love a lot of the folks at Ohio State, right? It's a great campus, great school, lots of learning curves there. I've even cheered for the Buckeyes, right? They have great sports there.
Hey man, everybody has faults.
Exactly, and they have great sports at Miami. These schools that are under investigation for all these controversies. I love watching sports. I love watching these teams.
Yeah.
But if they're not made an example of, if they're merely told, guess what, you're too big to fail, almost like one of these large banks that can't fail on Wall Street. If they're told that essentially you're too big, we can't bring you down because you'll kind of destroy the whole system, or you could take a huge chunk of it with you. That's going to be problematic, because then the message is being sent that, guess what, you can get away with whatever you want as long as we don't hear about it.
I think the problem is there's a couple of things going on. One, we got the scandal situation related to teams breaking the rules, and I'm actually going to try to walk away from the word scandal, but we got teams that are breaking the rules in order to win. And I think we went through already some of the incentive there. We've also got like a justice issue, I think, here. You have players that are brought in who essentially work full-time jobs outside of their scholarship and are not compensated even up to the full level of attendance.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you talk about student athletes, rarely do we talk about the student aspect of it. I mean, they're in the classroom ideally full-time, and they're also outside, their outside activities are just ridiculous. I mean, you know this, I know this, student athletes actually are some of the most organized people on a college campus, because they're going from like 6 a.m. all the way until 10, 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And no other student is doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I in no way would ever come down on athletes. I think they are literally doing the best they can with the situation, and
Yep.
not everybody is making the most of their opportunity, but not everybody makes the most of all their opportunities. Like, I guarantee you and I don't. Um, Actually, I can say that with all certainty that you and I don't.
I really wanted to showcase your tie today that you're wearing. If you could get the video up, that would be tremendous.
My tie is very nice. I really tried to show up and dress appropriately for your show, but Wireless Network is not agreeing with me. But
That's okay.
anyway, like, so I guess here's my thing. One, I think the real problem that is going on and why you see all these scandals, why you see um, things like the Miami situation, is the NCAA is trying to restrain the free market on a system that is extremely profitable. And granted, there are schools like Rutgers that are subsidizing athletics tremendously. A lot of the schools that are not making huge money are subsidizing their athletic programs. But by and large, these aren't the schools that are getting in trouble, like real trouble. Not like I accidentally texted a player while he was at the AAU tournament. I'm talking about like major scandal trouble. And I guess that's scandal, but you know what I'm saying.
Hmm.
These are not the schools that are breaking the rules outright. But the reason is that the schools that are getting in trouble, your Ohio State, your Miami, your Oregon, your Auburn,
Hmm.
like these are national title contenders. There's big money in these programs, and they're doing what they have to do to win. And the players on these programs, think of Cam Newton. I mean, superstar, #1 draft pick in the NFL, like legitimate star.
Yep.
And his influence on Auburn is worth far more than the value of that scholarship. It really is. And people want to say, like, I think this there's a case that's going on right now that has not reached a verdict of any kind, where some guys sued about their likenesses being used in the NCAA sports game.
Hmm.
And I've made this analogy multiple times on EDU Sports that people don't buy that game and play with Auburn to play with some random guy. They buy the game to play with Cam Newton.
Hmm.
But Cam Newton's not properly compensated for his value to that game.
Oh yeah, I mean students are cogs in the athletics machine for
Right.
sure. I mean,
People don't go into Auburn bookstore and buy Auburn 2 because they love the number 2. They buy it because it's Cam's jersey.
Yep.
You know, and I think it's very absurd that they're not allowed to profit from the use of their likeness. I think that's probably issue number one. Issue number two, haven't really heard, and like I've heard reasons, but not a great reason why these guys can't earn income outside of their scholarship.
Mhm.
And I know the whole competitive advantage thing, and that is the justification that's always used, is that these guys will get fluff jobs
Absolutely.
and they'll be able to pay them for doing nothing. And I'm like, so? I personally don't see an issue with that. I think
it's
should be properly compensated.
when capitalism sort of bumps into ethics, and when we compromise our ethics, that's the issue I see here, is that we're saying that it's okay to say that we've got rules on the books, but the system is just too big, too profitable, and rules don't matter. I mean,
I think that's an interesting point, though, Eric. Which side do you think the justice is on? Do you think the justice is on the side of the NCAA, or are the rules unjust?
well, I think basically everyone's a hypocrite. I mean, you've got the NC2A saying we've got rules, we've got to enforce them, but they know that they only exist because of this huge money earning machine. You've got schools saying we're going to use this money and put it back into academics and buildings on campus, but really that's a small portion of the funds. I mean, the funds usually go back into maintaining and sustaining the athletic programs and making them bigger, better, faster, etc. And then you've got students who, in a perfect world, they're coming to college in exchange for an education, in exchange for a degree, and to get to play the sport that they love, when in fact they are coming to campus to be part of a business, and they're not really compensated. As if you were doing this type of activity in a business world, suit and tie, whatever, and you weren't getting paid, but you were working your butt off for like 90 hours a week, people would, cry foul about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about this the other day. I think the issue of amateurism comes into play, and how amateurism across the world of sports is such a gray area nowadays. I mean, look at Michael Phelps, right? He's supposedly an amateur, but the guy's raking in, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, $40 million.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, making a fortune and continuing to be in the Olympics, which Olympics have kind of bended the rules a little bit about amateurism, obviously allowing professional basketball players and hockey players to play. But that's a great point. And I think the reason, though, seriously, you get yourself into trouble with these major scandals is a lot of these players could put yourself in Terrell Pryor's shoes or Cam Newton's shoes.
My feet aren't that big. Sorry.
Legitimate, yeah. I'm not 6'6", 250 pounds, but you're a legitimate superstar athlete coming out of high school, highly recruited by what at that time was probably the premier program in the country at Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So you have this opportunity to go play at a high-level school that's going to demand a lot of you and hope to receive a lot from you. Now, it's different with, say, the NBA on some level because there is opportunities to earn money, like going to Europe if you're ambitious, and guys have done that. But football, that's just not an option.
Yep.
Like, your option is, if you want to continue playing past high school, you have to go to college. So if Cam has the ability and the opportunity to play, like, he should be able to earn money for that skill. College should not be required. And they just don't have that option. So I think they try to restrain this free market on these guys' abilities, but you have to know that life will find a way, to quote Jurassic Park, that I'm not surprised when these things happen, is I guess what I'm trying to say.
I love the fact that you just referenced Jurassic Park. Way to insert that in there.
I had some Red Man and Method Man quotes in mind today too, but we'll just leave those in the stacks. But
we had a comment here from Twitter, and I'm probably going to mispronounce his name because I've only said it like 50 times before. But Michael Feenan, right? Feenan or Finan? Well, one of those ways is
close
correct.
enough.
He says that students shouldn't be able to make money, or students should be able to make money any way they like, so long as it isn't coming from or facilitated by the school. Which I think is an interesting comment because,
well, how do you define facilitated?
Scholarships, if a check is coming to you, you're being deposited in your account from the school, I think is what he's saying. That's being facilitated by the school.
I think that's because the reason I asked the question is you could certainly interpret facilitated as I'm paying you to come. Like, I always like to talk about the club promotion thing. Like, we're having a club promotion, come hang out with Ohio State football players, and they get paid for that. Well, that was really facilitated by the fact that they play at that school. It's hard to dissociate those. So I wouldn't go as far as that language, but I totally agree that they should be able to earn money, whether that's a job, a fluff job, or doing appearances or whatever. I think if they have the opportunity to earn income, that should be fine. And I think that would really reduce, if the NCAA would lay off of that one stipulation there, I think you might see some of these scandals reduced in number.
At least potentially. I mean, because I think that, a lot of the things that are occurring, they would occur if money wasn't there, right?
So I have an opinion question, though.
Okay, go ahead.
As you, and I would love to hear this from your listeners as well.
Because we're just listening today. We're not watching.
Yeah, your viewers. Well, I don't, anyway. Do you still view them as amateurs if they have the ability to earn income?
I think that if they're earning income and it's regulated through the school, then maybe. I think one thing I was going to mention that kind of ties into this is the idea of how much student athletics and college athletics plays into alumni development, fundraising for the schools, the brand of an institution. When we pop on the TV on a Saturday to watch a football game and we're wearing our jersey and we're cheering for our team that we graduated from that school, that affinity comes from the fact that we were on that campus watching those games.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's entertainment, right? It's like the theater, but again, it's not like the theater because the theater isn't on TV all the time. So I wonder about if amateur sports goes away in the way that we see it today, what happens to that model that currently exists that schools rely on amazingly, right? They have to rely on that right now because, like Butler's applications went through the roof, but interestingly enough, Butler's not growing. They decided they're just going to stay with the same amount of enrollment.
Let me paint you a scenario, though. So we'll call, give me a name, a random name.
Of an actual athlete or?
Just any name. We'll go with Justin Smith is a new superstar recruit. All right. Now he's picking between schools, and he knows that pretty much, he's picking like between Alabama and Texas. Two great, like prestigious programs with great coaches. So he's 18 years old. Now, do you think he's going to sign with a school if he has the opportunity to earn this income outside of school, without having an agent?
Are you saying that he would?
Because here's the thing that I see happening if they're allowed to earn income and really earn income like Wheaties boxes. I mean, I think that's a great example.
Yep.
I don't think you're going to be able to have these guys not have agents. And there's certain thing in the mind of the American sports fan that ties agents to unpleasantness.
Right. Well, just professional sports, right?
Yeah, and so what you have is slowly happening there. If you open those doors, is on some level a semi-pro system starting to develop.
Well, I mean, Michael Phelps, I'm sure he has an agent. I'm sure that, oh gosh, what's his name? Who's the runner from Jamaica?
Usain Bolt.
Yeah, I mean, the guy.
He's a legend, man.
He makes a ridiculous amount of money from Puma, right? Puma, when he set that record at the Olympics, they asked him what kind of car he wanted, and they just sent him like an M5 Mercedes or something like that, or a BMW. So,
all right, I got another question for you.
Keep it.
So
keep it coming.
let's assume Justin Smith signs an agent and to book his appearances and all this sorts of stuff. What happens to his scholarship?
Oh, in terms of does he need it because he's got all this cash flow?
I think that question is logical.
Well, you see
the faculty at Rutgers looking at athletics and saying they don't need the money, we can't get raises. So why wouldn't people start asking, why is he getting a scholarship when we can't get raises?
Well, I mean, scholarships are kind of like the lost leader, right? They're not exactly saying we're giving you the money and we're for the scholarship, or it's basically a null value, like an assistantship. Although sometimes for some assistantships, I guess, the department that is sponsoring you has to pay back into the school's fund. So maybe athletics has to pay that scholarship back into the general fund of the school.
Well, the problem is the money would stop coming. I think, let's say this system works out the way that I'm talking about. Say there's an EA Sports contract with the NCAA and the players are getting a cut of that each. That's less cut that's going to the actual school. And
it's a business. It's a business. I mean, Kelly Bailey makes a great point here. Old example of Michael Phelps opting to go to college but not compete for his school so that he could earn endorsements.
I know. She makes a great point. I think while the things we're talking about seem simple, they're not.
No,
but I think you have to look really and think about this hard. Like, is this actually a problem? And I think if you're going to talk about scandal and you're going to worry about, because the thing I worry about guys hanging out with a dude like Nevin Shapiro is the same thing I worry about with, and you can debate marijuana legalization or alcohol legalization. Let's go back to Prohibition. What happened during Prohibition when the system was forced to go underground? They went into these speakeasies, had like tons of moonshine floating around that guys were making in their basement. Alcohol became horribly dangerous.
Yep. Oh yeah, I mean, people are going blind. People are going blind because of moonshine. I think that's a great analogy. I mean, regulate it versus causing it to go underground.
So what they've done by basically saying the players can't earn income outside of their scholarship is they've forced the system underground, and the guys who they're interacting with are dudes who are running $900 million Ponzi schemes. Like, how does this not make everybody's head hurt?
I mean, the institution took a lot of money from this guy down in Miami, and it was sort of, before he was a criminal, taking money from him was just fine, super acceptable, because they didn't know where the funds were coming from. The second, it turns out that he's a felon doing this Ponzi scheme, everyone in Miami, he's a bad guy. We're doing our best to, sort of disassociate from him, and I think that, to give them, to not hammer Miami too much, they didn't know that the guy was a felon. However, they probably knew what was going on when it came to all the parties and everything, or they just turned their back on it and said, "Oh, I don't know what's going on," like Tressel did at Ohio State.
Right. Those guys were hanging out at a tattoo parlor that had drug connections. Like, these are the people who are willing to bend these rules under the table. And if the players were able to earn income where they didn't have to hang out with these guys, why would they do it?
Well, and
I'm not saying
we've been
I'm
the
not
rules.
saying some of them wouldn't.
as a society, we bend the rules, we bend ethics all the time. And like you said earlier at the beginning of the show, it's about winning, it's not about graduating.
Right.
And I think that that's the major point here, is that until it becomes about truly about the academics. I mean, every time ESPN runs a feature about a student athlete, I literally like jump up and down and clap when they talk about the student's major, because and honestly, the other part of this too is there's a huge gender component to this, because women's sports doesn't get nearly the amount of attention, money, donations, you name it. And I think that that's problematic, because we're perpetuating that men's sports are more important because the money that's put into it is just enormous compared to the money that's put into women's sports. So there's that gender component too, because there's just so much going on with collegiate athletics that has such a huge societal and cultural impact, that for folks to say this institution's bad, this school's bad, scandal, 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 it's a huge murky area, and the conversation could go on for days.
Well, I totally agree, and I think what I would like your viewers to get out of this show is to really think about how absurd this system is. In my mind, especially at the big programs like the superstar programs, these players are professional athletes. You know?
Well, they're certainly treated like it. I mean, the new sort of facility at University of Oregon, I remember seeing pictures of it. I mean, they're getting, they've got a dentist there on site. They've got amazing rehab facilities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about keeping these players on the field and making sure that they're at peak performance. And the return of that is maybe the player gets an award, but the main goal of that is so the institution makes a ton of cash, because at the end of the year they want to be on TV.
Yeah. And my point, though, these players are professional athletes. The coaches are professional coaches. The programs are run in a lot of ways like professional programs, but the players aren't compensated on the level of the value that they're given to the school. And the scholarship that they get, they don't receive the value from, because they're so busy playing football or basketball, And I think this is all the more true with what I would call the revenue sports.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's been a lot of noise recently that all this is going to change, but I just don't think it is. I really don't.
I think it's going to get pushed further and further underground. I think the NC2A, they're talking about enforcement and talking about schools that are, sort of penalizing themselves before the NCAA even gets to them. It's just going to push it further and further underground, and then we'll have, a quiet time, kind of a lull, and we'll think everything's going well, and then again we'll have huge scandals, and we'll have scandals at schools that, we sort of have this perception, right? It's all about imagery and branding. You get this perception that some of these schools are untouchable and they're doing everything above board, and then bam, you see the story and you say, oh, well, I guess they weren't so above board.
Well, Eric, you know the resolution the heads of the NCAA came up with about 2 or 3 weeks ago, when they claimed that they were going to deal with pay-for-play and all this kind of stuff. The academic progress rate was upped to qualify for tournament play. Now, are you familiar with this?
I didn't see that.
You can look it up. It'd probably be under NCAA APR changes or something like that. But there were several schools that under the new guidelines wouldn't have qualified for the tournament next year. But basically, it's a complex formula. Players have to be progressing towards graduation at an appropriate rate, and that they calculate the rate of all this, their grades and all this kind of stuff, and that determines how much what your APR is. And to qualify for postseason play, your APR has to be over a certain amount. So,
but I guarantee you they can petition that, right? If they're like a point off of it, they'll say, "Oh, we'll just petition that," or somehow, some way, a player's grade will go from like a B+ to an A-.
You're going the way I was going. My question was going to be, what is that going to lead to? And I think it's just academic fraud.
Oh yeah, I mean they fudge the rules all the time.
And it's not, again, it's not these guys. We talked about this yesterday when we were doing our pre-show thing. I love the television show The Wire because I think it's so illustrative of how systems affect people. And I wanted to talk in particular about Tommy Carcetti. He ran for mayor, like super, invested in being mayor, like trying to clean up Baltimore, trying to make the city a better place. But you see, as the season progresses and he actually gets elected and moved into office, and then you go into the next season, he slowly becomes part of the problem because he becomes part of the system. And so I'm not in any way saying that these guys are coming into this, whether the players or the coaches are coming in and getting like they're bad people and they're doing bad things.
Well, I mean, it takes a community to make real change happen. When
Totally.
you've got such a sort of sort of framed, formulated, institutionalized system, one or two people can't change it. One or two regulations can't change it. It has to come from the community. It's got to come from fans saying, you know what? When InsideHigherEd.com puts out their post, every year about the schools that actually had the best academic performance versus the schools that were in sort of like maybe like the 64 teams in the NCAA men's basketball in March Madness, if fans were to say, you know what? We're only going to watch if the teams that had the best grades were playing, because this is about graduating.
Yeah.
I mean, it's only going to happen when ESPN says, so-and-so's GPA is this. Oh, and oh yeah, they ran 2,000 yards this year.
But I think we had hoped to do this. I think we've covered a lot of ground, but one of the things you want to talk about is why student affairs professionals should care about this. And I think we've pretty much covered a lot of the issues and a lot of things going on. And in my opinion, there's still a lot more questions than answers about any of this stuff. But I think student affairs professionals should care first because they claim to care about students, and regardless of their professional athlete stance that I believe that they have, they're still students. And I think folks can be really hard on our student athletes and our athletic programs, but it's a system that's a complete mess, I think. There's so much money available to so many people and so many people wanting influence. And don't forget, athletics are very tied in with people remaining connected to the school. Mm-hmm. A winning athletic program draws in more donations and more people who are willing to participate in the life of the school. It's just, and so many people go to schools just because of the athletic program, because it's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
there is a huge community aspect to being able to be a part of a winning program. But let's not be blind. It's so bizarre to me, Eric, to see people who work in student affairs are defending people like Jim Tressel.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not in any way saying Tressel's a bad guy, but like, let's have a little more substantive conversation about what's going on here. Not just oh man, I'm gonna miss him. We won a lot of games. Like, there's so much more than that.
It's
really,
all about the rhetoric, right? Because if the rhetoric becomes that these people have done something that we think is legitimately wrong, then we ourselves have perpetuated it, have been part of it, and that's really hard to accept, right? So it's easier to say we miss you, farewell. I wanted to point out that Jeffrey Kirchick makes a really good point. That we're really focusing a lot on sort of the primetime D1 revenue-earning sports. And Jeffrey wrestled at Princeton, and he said he felt more like a student, and that our conversation sort of is limited to that 5% of college athletes. And I would say absolutely.
Totally.
We haven't talked about the fact that, college athletics isn't, I don't think we've ever said college athletics is a bad thing, get rid of sports, because some people will go that direction.
No.
I think that's ludicrous.
No.
You want to play sports, you want to go to college, you want to have your college give you scholarships or some sort of, support for it. That's really cool. It's like anything else. I was in the jazz band in college for a couple of years. They gave me a ton of support, helped get me through the first couple of years. It was awesome. Same thing with athletics, and I think that it's like a lot of systems, right? When we talk about the higher education bubble and all that, well, we're talking about schools like Harvard, Yale, MIT, these big Ivy League institutions, Berkeley, sort of a public Ivy. But we don't talk about the other 95% of institutions. We don't talk about college or community colleges. Community college athletics is huge, but it's also part of that system that's feeding a lot of these major NC2A programs.
Well, Eric, really, the point there, Princeton, I have a friend who coached football at Princeton. He was an assistant coach on the Princeton football team. He and I talked about some of this stuff one time, and he was like, man, we're just playing a completely different game. And I totally get the point, but I don't see a lot of issues on this kind of level going on with that. And there's so much tied in with money and corruption and all this kind of stuff going on with the NCAA. Like, Eric, ponder this for a second, and I know we're running out of time, so I don't want to get into too much here, but the people who are in that room making decisions about the future of college athletics, Some of them, 6 of them, are BCS commissioners. Every single BCS commissioner earns over $1 million a year.
Yep. Well, and
So why on
Ed
earth would
Ray.
they want to do anything that might endanger this system?
Well, here I'll give you a little inside information. So Ed Ray is the president of Oregon State University. He's on that committee. He's written, and been interviewed extensively about this. He used to work at Ohio State. He was part of the committee that helped to hire Tressel. Ed Ray's an economist, right? At the end of the day, he's going to talk about basically like, what do you have to do to keep things going? And sort of, they're going to make minor changes. They're going to have sort of this veil of oversight, but at the end of the day, it's going to be the status quo. And my biggest concern is that student athletes in these large marquee programs are really at risk because they become cogs in this machine. They're given all these different resources, all this alcohol, parties, you name it. And student affairs folks, here's one other piece of insight I would throw in here too, is that student affairs at a lot of institutions are sort of disconnected from athletics. Athletics oftentimes has academic support staff. They have academic advisors, folks that sort of do a lot of sort of student affairs functions, but it's for athletics proper versus sort of having student affairs folks get access to.
Yo, I don't
All
know.
right, I think we just lost Jeff. All right, we're back. Here we go. We had technical difficulties. Thanks for Jeff. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, man, I don't know what happened there.
That's okay. That's okay.
But anyway, one of the big things that I saw was people were pinning the whole Ohio State mess on Terrell Pryor when there was explicit data all over the place that this had been going on back since 2004 with Maurice Clarett, who mentioned that he had gotten a free car while at Ohio State. So I thought it was really interesting jumping on Terrell Pryor's Twitter feed and just see people excoriating Terrell Pryor, UPOS, blah, 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 and just ripping him to shreds. And I think what student affairs professionals should be doing in these situations is defending our athletes.
Absolutely. I think, and unfortunately, in the media and in a lot of our fans, student athletes are disposable, and it's disgusting. But that's the truth, right? You pin it on someone like Terrell Pryor, who maybe he gets drafted in the NFL, maybe he doesn't, but then he just sort of disappears. And then you've got Jim Tressel, who is going to retire or whatever he's going to do and have 7 figures or more in the bank account, and who knows what else he's got access to resources-wise. He's set for life.
Yeah.
And he's going to go around Ohio, and people are going to sort of see him as, you know what, you're a hero, you've been dented a little bit, but you're still a hero. Terrell Pryor, thanks for nothing.
Yeah. Thanks for causing us to get on suspension.
Yeah, and so I think it's a huge shift though in sort of the culture of D1 premier sports. That it's not going to change overnight, and it's only going to happen honestly once we start truly caring about the humanity of the students that are involved in this.
Totally agree.
Well, Jeff, any final comments, closing thoughts for the show today?
This is not an original thought, but one of the guys said, we're going to have to, this one of the journalists that I've read a lot, he said, we're going to have to start thinking about these players as more than just people that are there for our entertainment. And that they're actually students and athletes, and they're trying to do their best to make something out of themselves. And then they're also under 22 years old. So give them some slack. But we're going to be going live on EDU Sports here in about 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So we have a lot of stuff on the docket, and I hope folks can jump over there to breakdrink.com/live and join myself and Doug and Pete and
Absolutely.
Daniel.
We'll have Ardith tweet that link out here so that folks can actually find it. But folks, I've been talking with Jeff Lail. Jeff is the host of the EDU Sports podcast, as well as a program coordinator for activities and programs at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. And although we didn't have a video today of Jeff, thanks for coming on the show, man. It's been a great conversation.
Man, just so everybody knows, I wore my tie the whole show. I was looking very professional for me.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, man. I enjoyed it.
All right, folks. Well, we made it through our sort of whirlwind of technical difficulties and all sorts of other little things. Hopefully you enjoyed the conversation. I know we were all over the map when it came to talking about collegiate athletics, but that's the way it works with collegiate athletics. There's a lot of things going on. So next week's show, gonna have a really cool show next week. I'm really excited about this. I'm gonna be joined by Tanya Justin. She's gonna come on. She's gonna talk about higher education and social media. She does a whole bunch of stuff at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. She's writing a book right now actually about higher education and social media that I hope is going to be coming out shortly, so she'll be talking about that. Again, folks, thank you for watching. Thank you for participating via the hashtag on Twitter. Really enjoyed today's conversation. We will see you next week, same time, same channel. My name's Eric Stoller. This is Student Affairs Live. Take care.